Hello?
Hi guys, so um, I'm not sure this started yet.
We are live, yeah.
But really appreciate you guys joining in. So my name is Ronaldo Menezes. I'm a professor of data and network science here at the University of Exeter, and we'll have some discussion related to COVID and human mobility. So I'll start the introductions here so that you know who's in this call. So it is going to be a very informal. So Ricardo, please.
Hi, I'm Riccardo Di Clemente. I'm a lecturer in data science at the University of Exeter, and I'm part of this team that analyzes the changes in mobility in the UK during the COVID crisis.
So Hugo.
Hello, guys. I'm Hugo Barbosa. I'm a lecturer of computer science in the area of human dynamics and urban systems. And I'm also part of this team analyzing the mobility patterns during the COVID pandemic here in the UK.
And Federico.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Federico Botta, and I'm also lecturer in data science here at the University of Exeter in the Department of Computer Science. And I also was part of the team working on this project.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys, the three of you joining, and whoever is watching this. So we're gonna just try to have an informal conversation. This is strange times in terms of COVID. Some of us at different, I guess, levels are interested in this idea of human mobility. So I'll start actually with Hugo, because I don't know if the audience actually understands what human mobility actually is. So what is the study of human mobility, Hugo? So can you define for us this?
Yes. So human mobility is the area of research that investigates the patterns behind human movements. And I'm not talking about movements in the sense of dancing, but movements in terms of displacement, traveling behaviors, human migration, commuting patterns, and so on. Yeah, that's in a broad sense what human mobility studies.
So how did it all start? Maybe I think Ricardo has quite a lot of nice words on this. So how did this come about?
Yes.
Why do we care, really?
Oh, yeah, we care about because it could be very useful for urban planning, for understanding better our interaction within the cities, to improve our daily life, like for traffic, or either to improve like our social connection, or like the overall economic, understand better the economics of the cities. So there are very different venues where you can apply these studies.
Yeah. So it's actually it's becoming quite popular. So we see, if you actually look at the number of publications over the years, right? Of course, there are seminal works of colleagues of ours, Marta Gonzalez and Xiaoming Song, but you can see that over the years, the number of papers trying to somehow look at patterns and regularities has increased. So Federico, you're an expert, I guess, in data science as well. So I guess one of the main concerns people have is, all right, so what kind of data are those guys using to do this? And I guess I will open this for everybody a discussion in terms of privacy. So should people be concerned that we are tracking them, or but what is the connection between this and data science in general?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. I think one of the reasons why I guess the studies of human mobility have been kind of picking up and growing in the last few years is because we have an increasing availability of data that we can use to study human mobility. So I guess traditionally, I think this would be rather difficult to study because it's hard to know where people are and how they move, and when they move and where they go. I guess, as we all know, recent years we have, everyone has smartphones that produces lots of digital data, contains location data, GPS coordinates. We use social media, which often leave footprints of where we are. And so the connection between data science and study human mobility comes from the fact that we have this huge availability of data sets which contain, to an extent or another, data on where we are and how we move around. And so we, I guess, as data scientists can use this data and extract information to understand patterns, as Hugo and Ricardo were saying, about regularities, how we move around, how on in our cities, we commute, for instance, how traffic could behave, and many other features there.
So let me continue here on this, because I maybe play a little bit of a skeptical one here, right? So we discussed, I think Ricardo mentioned this idea of traffic. So don't we know about this already? We know traffic is bad in the morning and traffic is bad in the evening, right? So what else are we trying to look? I mean, is there a secret that if I leave at 8 o'clock and I live in London, then I'm stuck in traffic for a long time?
No, of course it's not. So I take the ball. So of course it's not a secret, and then you can look around yourself and have already a grasp of the entity of the traffic and the dynamics. The problem is that we are all together that we are moving inside a system, a very complex system that is the city. For example, the city of London. So the idea is that is it possible to assess the flow of all the people together and how they interact all together? If you imagine that in the 60s and the 70s, actually they were performing. They were sending people across the streets, counting person or counting either. I think if I was when I was young in the 80s, they were the guy with the clock that was counting the cars that pass through the cross.
Yeah.
Actually, if you go around the UK, you can see that there are not only velox, but there are either cameras that only count the flow of the cars. So there were a huge system and a lot of money spent on it. Then there was a lot of studies and surveys. So there was a lot of money, but you have to pay people to do surveys, and it's going to be time, and then you have to do every year to assess how does it change. So this new dimension of data that Federico just told us, that is passively collected, can create a new dimension of information, and actually can help us to save money in this analysis, provide new reliable data. Of course, it does not replace the survey or like demographic studies, because sometimes you don't have a perfect match of population and other complexity feature, but at least can help to assess the situation.
And a lot of times we can extrapolate from one location to another one, right? So so there are, of course, certain locations in the world that perhaps do not have the same resources, financial resources to collect the data, let's put it this way, and then we can extrapolate from one city that have similar characteristics. In fact, I think Hugo has some collaborations on looking at shapes of cities that I think in a future conversation we can probably include this as well. But what about the privacy, right? So I actually threw the bait there. Nobody picked it up. So maybe some people listening to this and say, look, I'm now freaking out, because I confess to you that I travel sometimes and I mention this to lay people. And I had actually one particular situation where somebody said, look, came after my talk and said, I really not comfortable that you guys are looking at my cell phone and what I do. So, and I had to say, look, we are not particularly interested on you, right? So it's not you, no, in no particular way, and it's not a detriment to the person. You're not special in that sense that I'm just tracking you. It's more from a general regularity. So, but should people be concerned? Anyone wants to talk about this?
I can start with that. So basically, what we do is analyze global behavior. First, we take the data only from people that decide to share with us this data following the GDPR. And we are doing only this for research and for good purposes. So we are not doing any targeting, marketing, or anything at all. And then basically what we do is like we define aggregate features that we want to extrapolate for each user. And then we analyze this aggregated feature, sometimes by the distribution, sometimes running simulations, sometimes correlation. But we are always capture aggregate information that are totally, so we cannot trace the single user, like come back and say, okay, you were in particular location in the city. So we don't have the possibility to do so, and actually we want to do so. We don't care to do so. We want to assess the well-being of the city and how he is impacted by the mobility or like by social interaction. And we always like take in consideration the privacy of everybody.
Yeah, I don't know what the other guys.
Maybe I can add something.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because that's one of the dimensions, the dimension of the data processing. But I think the other side of the concern is that what's the gain for society when you're talking about like the fact that like mobile phone companies, they do collect these location data sets for billing purposes. I have been doing research on these mobility analysis from mobile phone traces for quite a few years, and it has been always a debate in the area, like what are the gains for society? Because like up to until recently, it was really well, some sort of like scientific gain, so to speak. But I think with this entire COVID pandemic, it became very clear the importance of how much we can learn and understand about human mobility patterns, and the importance for that in the context of, for example, preventing the spread of a disease like this one. So throughout the world, like mobile phone data sets like these ones that we use, they are becoming increasingly important for governments and for um, health authorities, for them to actually um, mitigate the impact of the pandemic and understand better the societies. I think nowadays I think at this moment, it's very clear what's the benefit for society, for us academics and for the scientific community to have access to data sets like this one.
It's actually an interesting point, because we're going to talk about the reports that is related to COVID, right? But even here in the UK, I think some of us actually signed this letter asking for government to consider social isolation at some point, and most of the people signing that were in complex systems and somewhat related to human mobility, because we can't claim, I mean, I think this made it more on the forefront, this COVID, but we know, of course, that colleagues of ours, like Alex Vesperiani, for instance, have been doing and using models of human mobility in the past on avian flu and swine flu, right? So it's now, I think everybody seems to understand that this is the way forward, right? So that we can actually measure, which I guess the reports that you guys are going to discuss actually talks about. Another point that I'm interested in actually hearing from you is the fact that maybe the general population doesn't understand that companies actually do, for the good of society, already track us. For instance, Google Maps and something. So there is a reason why we know there is a traffic somewhere, right? It's not by accident. Anyone wants to comment on that? That this is actually commonplace?
Yeah, I think I can comment on that. Yeah, it's true that as we carry our mobile phones, companies they can offer services for us. I'm talking about like the context of pandemic, but Google Maps and other location services, when they collect information, of course, with when the user authorized for them to collect this kind of information, they can offer a different kind of services that they could before. For example, offering information about traffic congestions, accidents, and it's a benefit for society, because I mean, this way we can actually use better the urban system. I remember that you asked the question about the importance, since we already know that London is going to have traffic certain time of the day. But if we can know beforehand where traffic's happening, what are the roads that are more congested, we can plan ahead and make more informed decision on what kind of path we're going to take, actually minimizing or alleviating the traffic congestion that was there in the first place. So yeah, I think these companies, they can offer interesting services when they have access to this kind of data.
Yeah, and then dating sites, right? So I mean, there are so many, I guess, applications that say there is somebody that maybe you are interested because you have a description nearby. So, and people seem to enjoy that, and that only comes about because there is some level, I guess, of quote unquote tracking, but with the permission of the user. Federico, in relation, we talk about COVID, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of mobility in face of this phenomena that, I mean, we live in something like an event in 100 years. How does this mobility tracking or mobility analysis help us on the COVID situation?
Yeah, so I think I mean, this is a very interesting question, I think, to answer. I think, I mean, the thing with this current crisis and the COVID pandemic is that it's kind of an unprecedented situation, and it's a virus that we didn't know anything about until a few months ago, really. And it's a virus for which we have no cure, we have no vaccine, and there is no immunity in the population because it's a new disease. And so the way that this disease is spreading, of course, is by people interacting with each other, because we know that this disease, we catch the virus if we're in proximity of someone who has the virus as well. Right. And so clearly, the way that people move around and how much they interact is crucial for how many people are exposed to potentially the virus and therefore are potentially becoming infected with it. And we know that mobility is important because the virus started in China, but then started spreading across the world because, of course, we live in a world, or till a few months ago, we lived in a world where traveling across the world was very easy.
I don't remember what that is anymore.
Yeah, I don't really remember how an airplane looks like. So traveling, was very easy, and therefore we could make, we could go across the globe, virtually, in not much time at all, like a day or two, and we could be on the other side of the world. And of course, this is a key component of how the virus can spread. But also because the fact that we have no cure and no vaccine, one of the main measures that we can take is a non-pharmaceutical measure, which is effectively reducing the possibility of these interactions happening. And interactions between people often happen, when people, you go to a cafe to get a coffee, or you go to the supermarket to do your weekly shop, or you go, I don't know, to buy some clothes or buy some books and just go for a walk. So all of these different aspects of how we move around contribute to how likely we are to interact, and therefore how likely we are to come into contact with someone who has been infected. So studying how and understanding how we move, how much we move, or how little we move if we're subject to some measures like the ones that have been put in place, kind of everywhere in the world, really, is crucial for this.
So Ricardo, so we are fortunate that we have you here, right? Because we use in those reports the data that you had access before we had. So we want to say something about the data.
Yeah.
We can discuss the reports that we have.
Practically after the beginning of the COVID, actually when he started to become a more worldwide issue, and in Europe, it started with Italy and Germany. And the country that get more at the beginning was like Italy. So there were a couple of colleagues of mine. Actually, there was a group of Tizzoni from HIFI that start to develop some reports on the Italy development of the COVID, how this was linked to mobility, and how we can assess this. So after the first report, since they used to be in contact with the same company that I work since 5 years, that is a Cuebiq, that is a data intelligent company that actually works with collecting data from a GPS mobile device for the people that give their consents. And he is working with Data for Good. He has a Data for Good project. So I work with them in order to assess traffic, commuting behavior, and for example, in another project, how to understand the activities of census tracts that are more or less neighborhood, in how this neighborhood changed during the activities of a neighborhood changed during time. So I start to say, okay, maybe we can do something similar to the Italy researcher, and maybe they start to have some insight within the commuting behavior pattern and social interaction in UK. So since I was in Exeter, just been appointed, and then and all of us actually work in social behavior, human interaction, and human mobility. We became a natural group to work with. It's been joined of us students actually of Professor Ronaldo that was close to me, and help us with some of the analysis. And we start to develop this idea of this project in order to provide some insight and follow-up of how in UK the mobility has been impacted, how in human interaction.
Yeah, so and then we generated this first report. Maybe Federico or you can say something about this first report, and what did we show? I mean, are we making recommendations at all in this, or what was the purpose of the first one? What are the main findings?
Yeah, so I think, as Ricardo said, we were, I guess thanks to Ricardo, we had access to this very interesting data set that we could use to study mobility of people across the UK. So we thought, to have a look at this data and see how the mobility was changing at the early stage of the COVID crisis in the UK. So we started looking at this around, I guess, the end of March, beginning of April, when COVID was really picking up in the UK. So just to mention for people maybe listening, they're not aware of this, the UK entered the lockdown on the 24th of March. But as Ricardo's already mentioned, the virus was already spreading quite rapidly across many other countries in Europe. So one of the things that we were interested in this report was studying how mobility was changing before the lockdown measures were introduced in the UK, because clearly the population was, at least to an extent, already widely aware that COVID was going to be a global crisis. Italy had already entered the lockdown in early March, and in fact, when we did the report, so this first analysis, we noticed that people started reducing their mobility levels in the UK already before the introduction of lockdown measures by the government.
So in a way, some sort of self-organized, so people are already aware of it, or
yeah, I guess
from other means, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess people were already getting, well, the information was already circulating, online. There's lots of information going on the internet and social media, and people were already, I guess, starting to think about this a little bit more carefully. There were some early signals by the British government that we might enter in some form of restriction measures on mobility. So, for instance, there was, before the actual lockdown measures were introduced, there was a message to try to work from home if at all possible. And we see in our first report, actually, that when this message was put out, people started reducing their mobility quite a lot. And then once the actual lockdown measures were introduced, then the mobility dropped by around 80% compared to the same period of the previous year. And what was interesting that we did also in the first report was also looking at, is this kind of behavior similar across the country, or is it different in different parts of the region? Because the UK, like many countries in the world, is quite different countries. So there's like big cities. I mean, London is a huge city, but there's also very rural areas. So we studied how the mobility changed across all the regions of the UK. And broadly speaking, I think people reduced their mobility to a similar level across all of the UK. So that includes Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland as well, other than England.
Yes, and here it's even, I guess, more prominent, those differences there, right? Because we have slightly different administrative, I guess, independencies there, right, between Scotland and Wales. They have the ability to actually change a little bit the how they do it, the lockdown procedures. And you see, I think they relaxed the lockdown in schools here before Scotland did something. Ricardo, you and Hugo, I guess you've been involved. You talked about the Italy case, right? That had a peak before the UK. I guess Hugo been involved on looking at things in Brazil. Are we seeing similar things? I mean, is this what we see in the UK here? Is it in some way similar to what you guys observed in the other data sets and other countries?
I can take. So basically, we see very similar trends. Actually, everybody can go. There is a couple of websites that can show you the trends across many countries. There is the one from University of Oxford. There is World in Data, or there is like a World Meter, something that provide you like an overview of the number of cases, how that gets spread. It's more about the counting of the cases. We have to take in consideration that each country has its own policy. So when you analyze this kind of data, especially for the epidemiologic point of view, and the other groups that are more in depth, they're studying more this kind of data. So each country has a very specific way of gathering data and collecting information. But overall, there is an emergence of similar trends across country, with, of course, delta days, difference of days when the epidemics start to grow exponentially. But across all the world, we see the similar trend, the spreading, and how the mobility impacted this.
So Hugo, is that the same thing with the data in Brazil? Because we've been hearing that Brazil, and of course you're from Brazil, and me too. So it's the situation does not appear to be going that well. So are they having the same sort of patterns in terms of lockdown procedures? I don't know if Hugo is with us.
I think that Hugo is frozen. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
Okay.
Hugo left, right?
Oh, maybe you can comment a little bit on Brazil, since you are.
Well, I mean, I haven't looked at myself, to be honest, at the data from Brazil. I mean, if I comment, it will be based on what we hear on the news. But it seems that the point that I think is important to be made here is that we have in our second report some analysis by socioeconomics, right? So the level of that, I guess Hugo will talk in a little bit, by the level of income, which somehow ties with the arguments that I guess in Brazil they were defending, the so-called vertical isolation, right? Where you say, well, some people, I guess, if you are from working classes and you have to work to survive, maybe you should be on the streets. And I think our report, to a certain extent here in the UK, says that actually there is, in practice, there is a de facto vertical differences there between the social classes, right? So that some classes never actually got into lockdown to the same level as the top, let's say the wealthy classes, which shows that there is some sort of inequality already there in the system, even when you're not implementing this vertical isolation. But so maybe we can, that's a good thing for us to actually move into the second report, right? So if we get our host back, I think Hugo seems to get in and out, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the second report. So what was the second report about? So anyone wants to?
So I can start with the first part of the second report. So at the beginning, basically it was like just after a month, we decided to redo the analysis of the radius of duration, just to see how has been perceived this lockdown measure, how they did it last. Actually, we see that the lockdown measure was well accepted by the citizens for until the 23 of April. And then there was a slowly starting back on the mobility, but not at the same level as before. Our report arrived at the 22 of May, and we see that the mobility is being increased from the lockdown, about 20-25%, but we are still under the 100% of normal movements around the city. And then
this was before the government, right? So this was before the government relaxed. So you already start seeing some picking up. So in a sense, people, in the same way that Federico was saying that people are getting into the lockdown mode before the government announced, we've seen that also people were getting a little bit, I would say, tired of it, and maybe risking or getting out a little bit more before the government kind of said, hey, you can go out, I suppose.
I think that's...
sorry.
No. I was just saying that I think that's related also to the fact that other European countries at that point were already starting to lift some of the lockdown measures, at least ease them. And so I think maybe potentially, the population was seeing that happening, and that was kind of not encouraging, but making the people feel a little bit more like they wanted to resume their mobility as before, and so they started to move a little bit more than when the lockdown measures had just been introduced.
Yeah, I'm actually going to just use this time to maybe ask, maybe some of our students are online, that maybe on YouTube they can actually post the link to the reports, because we're having some technical difficulties on sharing the screen. So we could actually show the charts here on this conversation, but maybe if people, maybe Mariana or Ana, Clodomir, Simon, if they could actually share the link on the YouTube channel, it would be nice for people to actually refer it to. So Hugo, before we lost you, we were talking, but I think you came back exactly at the right moment. We were talking about the second report and this fact that we've seen an increase, people picking up their mobility, right? So moving more. which, by the way, I think that is an idea here for me to ask Ricardo. We've been saying people move more, move more. What does that mean? Distance or frequency? Because I mean, I think more becomes a little vague, I guess, if you people don't understand what or read the report.
Basically, in order to keep the privacy and everything, as we already said, so the idea is like what we check is just only the radius of gyration, what we define radius of gyration. That is not only like a measurement of how is so how is spread your whereabouts.
Disbursement, right? Yeah.
So how you wander around the city, how you wander around your neighborhood. So it's like it's a general measure. It's just a distance of like, let's say we can say, so approximately we can say, okay, if your radius of gyration is 2 kilometers, means that during the week you're going around on average 2 kilometers. So maybe in these 2 kilometers there is your average trip to the supermarket or eventually to the work, but we don't have any information of the direction where you go or what you do.
That's so the area that you stay, right?
So yes, it's the area that you spend during the average area that you spend during the day.
Right.
And yes, we take, and so for us, we're 100% of your mobility, 100% is your stable radius of gyration. So the stable area that you span during the week, during January, at the beginning of January. And then this is our stay point, this is our baseline. And then we check how you are decreasing this radius, your whereabouts during the lockdown, after the lockdown. Of course, this relaxing of, let's say, movement. So the restarting of taking movement, we don't know if it's due to people that get relaxed or maybe either people that get used to the measurement and understand how move safely. So maybe at the beginning they're scared, they do not understand how to move safely, maybe wearing mask or like, if I can go to the supermarket. Yeah, of course you can go to the supermarket, something like that. So maybe there is something else too. There is not only like people that get bored about being closed in lockdown. Yes, basically.
Yeah, yes, so this actually ties with my comment that I was asking. I was going to ask you, Hugo, before we lost you, Hugo. I'm glad to have you back, which is this idea of synchronicity, right? That you put on the second report. So we actually mentioned in the beginning that we synchronize, and I actually made this joke that we already know that in the morning we have traffic, in the evening, but you decided to actually measure this. So can you comment on what that is?
Yeah, sorry, I'm having some connectivity issues here, so I think I lost a couple of your questions. But one thing that's important for us to mention is that mobility, human mobility, is not a phenomenon in itself. It's a some sort of a second order phenomenon that is to some extent driven by all the dimensions of what we do. So, for example, when you talk about commuting patterns, they are driven by our working schedules, by our mobility demands, like what time of the day we go to run errands, to do groceries. So all sort of like human activities, to some extent, they can generate some sort of travel demand for us. And of course, what time of the day these travels are going to happen, they are connected to the activity schedules that we have. What are kind of activities we are performing? And one of them, of course, is the well-known synchronization of labor. We humans, as societies, we work together to accomplish things. So we need to go to places sometimes, or used to. We used to go to places to work, but work is a collective, it is a social process. And as we tend to move to certain places, certain times of the day, what happens is that in addition to how far we are traveling, another important is how many people are traveling at certain time of the day or at the same time. Because it doesn't matter if I'm taking a train from, I don't know, from like the south of England to London, if I'm traveling by myself. But what matters is like how many people I'm like in close contact with or I'm being exposed to. And the synchronicity that we analyzed is basically that. What time of the day we see more people leaving their areas of residence. So we analyzed basically what time of the day people were traveling more than 300 meters away from the area where they live, not of course their homes, but the area where they live, and what time of the day like they were traveling, and how many people were traveling at the same time within that particular hour. And
so are you talking about the normal circadian rhythms that we have?
What we know is that as we synchronize our activities, we tend to do certain things certain times of the day. For example, we tend to leave to work around 8 something in the morning and come back at the end of the early in the evening. And before the pandemic, it's well known that human beings, they have very clear rhythms. They tend to go to certain place every day around the same time, being it in the morning to go to work or to go to school, or in the evening to go to the gym. We tend to do certain things, certain times of the day, every day, or twice a day. And what we analyzed was that, okay, what is this, let's say, like this pulse of the society, or the rhythm of the society? How rhythmic is a society, or how many people are traveling at the same time? And that was our analysis on synchronicity.
Synchronicity. So in fact, there was a question on YouTube, right? And maybe I'll bring Fede here on this. That, I mean, still in terms of clarification, you were talking, Hugo, about this being a second order effect, right? So that is a consequence of something else. But I think Sarah was asking us in terms of what other things actually affect what we do, and maybe Fede can say something, everybody can say something on that. So you said work activity, but is there anything else, Federico? Is there any other thing that you think would affect how we do things?
Yeah, I think as we've been discussing, there's quite a lot of different things that can affect how we move around and when we move around and why we move around. I guess traditionally, let's say pre-COVID, some of the factors that affect how we move around are things like where do I work, where the workplace, and what kind of job I have. What kind of job I have affects what time I start my work day and what time I finish my work day. So that's clearly a very important factor. As I guess Sarah was also mentioning in the question, different regions are different. It's very different if you live in London and then if you live, for instance, in a rural part of the country, in which maybe in order to go to the supermarket in London, you just walk for 5 minutes or get the tube for 10 minutes. Whereas if you live in a rural area, maybe you have to drive for 45 minutes. So that's clearly an important factor. But then I guess the interesting thing, with the COVID crisis is that another factor that affected quite strongly mobility are these, let's say, non-pharmaceutical interventions for reducing the spread of the virus, which are effectively what we'll be referring to as lockdown measures. So
yeah, which is what I guess Hugo was referring to, the synchronicity there, right?
Yeah, definitely. And sorry, go on, Hugo.
Yeah, I think in addition to the individual level demands, as we are talking about in terms of work, study, there's also a social process in terms of like how households, they coordinate, how they're going to realize certain demands, like how the parents, they coordinate who is going to bring the children to the school, who is going to pick them up, what time they're going to do that, how they synchronize what time they leave to work. So all those like individual level process, they have a collective or a social dimension as well, in which we human beings, we coordinate to execute and to realize those travel demands and the activity schedules.
Yeah, so I think the interest people could also check. I'm sure there's the work of Ciro Catuto on gender. There is the work of Mariana, your PhD student, Hugo, that you guys published recently on the gender facts. So there are actually factors. I think a lot of our colleagues, and I guess yourselves, are looking at different socioeconomic dimensions that actually can lead to differences. Federico actually pointed out something that's quite interesting, which is the area where we live, from the question from Sarah, right? So it's not only rural city, but even within the city, right? So if you may not have the same level of transportation or linkage, I suppose, which forces you to have certain routes. So we are bound, I guess, by the infrastructure that is around us, in a sense, right? So
actually, I can keep for this, because if you take in consideration, either in actually in our second report, what we did is just to understand this relation of decreasing in mobility together with the spatial structure of the area that the people live in. So basically, is sparse, is less dense population or more dense population. So there is a more sparse household or like more dense one. And if is in this, if there is any correlation either with the wealth of a neighborhood. So for example, if you check in London, so London has a lot of mobility because people live around all the cities, and that more of them have to commuting to the city center. So they have a high radius of gyration during the working day. But then we see a very high loss in mobility, either if you are in a very dense populated area, because you have to travel a lot, and now you will travel only like few blocks to go to the supermarket. Meanwhile, in an area like Scotland, maybe are more sparse in population. So yes, there is a loss of mobility for your traveling, for your work issues, but still you have to travel a little bit farther to reach your supermarket, for example, or either in the countryside. In England, is the same situation. So this changing mobility give us some information about the area and the resource and the purpose of the people movements, how these are affected and have been affected by the work, affected and be affected by the work.
So given that so many factors, right? If we stay here just a little bit now, I'm actually curious on my own question, right? So given so many factors, I mean, different age distributions of the city, different structure, geometric structure that I think Gaurav Ghoshal did with Hugo before, given the gender differences, right? So you have cities that, I guess, due to many factors, for instance, women are not even sometimes allowed to have the same mobility level as men. Can we really do a generalization, right? So has anyone actually confirmed and said, okay, here's the composition of the city? Composition, what I mean is some characteristic, age distribution, structure, and then made a hypothesis that perhaps the mobility in another place has to be this way because they have similar characteristics, and then got that confirmed using some sort of data-driven approach? Is that something that exists? Anyone familiar with this?
I mean,
because I'm talking about the generality of the work, right? So sure. We talk about
I can try to start answering this question. It's a very important question. One thing that for us to keep in mind that we're talking about human beings that exhibit a broad range of complexities, both at, as I said before, at the individual level in terms of decision making, necessities, but as well as in terms of as a society, right? The kind of activities, the complexity of the activities that we perform makes it like extremely difficult for us to find universal rules and laws to explain like why and how we move. That said, one thing but there are certain aspects of human mobility that are universal regardless what kind of society we are looking at, what kind of country, culture, gender. There are certain patterns in terms of like what's the characteristic travel length for human beings, the radius of gyration that we have been talking about, the distribution of radius of gyration, the temporal regularities as well. So there are many like physical characteristics of human mobility that seem to be universal across different countries, cultures, and societies.
Oh, yeah, it's very interesting. So I'm kind of becoming conscious of time here, and I don't want to hold you guys for too long on your Friday evening, right? So I mean, I can't say that here in the UK it's a lovely evening because it's raining a lot. But anyway, so it's what we used to here. So we can imagine being, or maybe put a background on Zoom being really sunny and pretend we are doing that. But there's changes that we've seen on those reports, right? So I guess I'm gonna put a crystal ball and ask you guys to predict the future, right? So we seen the changes in mobility. We see that people are picking up. Do we expect them to go back to where it was? I mean, we hear a lot in the news that the world will never be the same as before. Do you think this will affect in the also be perceived in the way we move? Perhaps we will move less, right? So because now I'm used to buy on the shop just around the corner, so I don't have to go to the big one. So do you think this will happen? That we will fundamentally change?
I don't think so. I think that there's going to be like more knowledge for the people, how they move. There is this increasing knowledge of what they used to do and what they do now. And so maybe there is a better understanding. But I don't know how much it's going to last, because probably, hopefully, if you were lucky, by the end of the year, it's going to come a vaccine, and then COVID will fade away. We don't know if it's going to be a second wave or whatever, but hopefully, in the best likely scenario, by the beginning of 2021, we'll be like relieved by this problem. But I think that people will be more aware about the movement, but then I will be back to the normality. Yes, for sure, with more knowledge, and yes, maybe it could be this all this huge problem could be a very good help to fight to help the green cause of the environment and the global changing, and so yes,
what do you think, Fede? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think broadly speaking, I agree with Ricardo, even though I think that and I agree that there's going to be more, people will have more knowledge and think more about, how much they move and how much they fly, about, generally about moving. But I think one of the things that, this situation has shown, and I think that people will help people realize that actually a lot of people can relatively easily work from home. So for instance, home working and smart working will probably, in my opinion at least, become not the normal practice, but it will become a more accepted and more common practice. I mean, of course, not everyone can work from home. It depends on many factors. So I don't think everyone will keep working from home forever. But I think it will be a more common practice that people will do. And therefore, if this becomes more standard, this will have an effect on mobility, because of course people don't have to commute as much. And we have already seen, I think, some cities, even including here in Exeter, that are thinking about, in the short term, how to help with social distancing measures by converting roads to cycle paths. And these measures could become, could be only temporary, but could also be permanent in long term, encouraging people to get cycle more. That kind of ties in with what Ricardo was saying as well, with helping the environment and I guess generally the traffic as well.
What do you think, Hugo?
And another add on top of what Fabrizio, Federico, and Ricardo said is that we have been revolving around the socio-economic dimension, talking about different aspects, and I think this is one of the important components for us to discuss. Is that if you look beyond like the country, the UK, if you look at like beyond like certain segments of society, I think it's unlikely that things are going to be like that for too long. Because, for example, it's a small set of areas of human activity that can work from home, can work remotely. Because we have people we have farmers who have to go to the farms. We have people who have to go to like
construction workers,
grocery stores, and all those things. As we mentioned before, the mobility is the realization of demands. So, but these demands, they are going to continue in place, right? So even though we still need to shop, we still need to eat, and my intuition is that, as you both said, is that at the beginning things might look different, it might be different, but as we're gonna see in the report, is that it's a privilege. There is a socioeconomic privilege in terms of social isolation. It's not all social classes that have the privilege to isolate themselves. Like when you talk about a country like Brazil, a country that is very unequal and very segregated, the poorest areas of the country, they cannot isolate themselves because they have to eat. They work during the day to earn the money that they're going to use to buy their dinner. So I think in midterms, so to speak, I think as these demands, they keep putting the pressure on the travel realization. I think we will eventually get back to normal, hopefully with a vaccine that can protect us.
I think it's going to be quite interesting, right? Because in Ricardo, I think there is more interesting dates and announcements, Federico, that will be made in terms of the opening of the stores. So I think people should watch this space on report number 3 and report number 4, because I think it's I've seen people saying that people will go crazy, right? In a sense, when they open, there will be lines, and I think we've seen this. I don't know if you saw on the news that there were lines on IKEA, right? And I think I saw reports of kilometers of people waiting just to buy some furniture, which, I mean, I personally don't understand. I have a hard time putting those things together. So I'm not sure I want to wait for 3 hours just to have some sort of a bunch of pieces at home to play with. But it might be that I've seen people saying, well, people go crazy traveling. Oh, it's been so long that we haven't seen an airplane, and we're going to see this rush. So I think it's a very interesting time, and I don't know if you agree, for our area, because we've seen phenomena that we may never see again, right? So this lack of synchronicity, this announcements, government interventions, countries that don't have government interventions, right? So if we had access to those to compare, so very interesting times, right? So, well, yeah, I guess it was not a question, but I mean, and maybe Ricardo does not want to write report 3 or 4 or something.
No, yes, of course. Of course, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think the next reports, they're going to bring like important insights about what's going to be the economic impact of reopening for travel. So, because I mean, mobility is an important driver for dynamic.
Yeah, and I can keep from this because in many countries there is the lockdown has been relieved by class of workers. So in this way, hopefully we can check some impact on this, depending of course, economy and social classes and social interaction. And
it became apparent this morning, right? So you saw that with the economy here shrunk by 20% or something, right? So something that has never happened. Yeah. And you can see that the main driver is probably mobility, right? The main factor that we went through in the last few months was not able to go to many places, and shows how important this is to the economy. Guys, I'm going to try to wrap up, I think, but I will start maybe if some people maybe are listening to this and maybe later they said, okay, hopefully you say, oh, cool area, right? Really nice, and I like to do that. So Federico, what do people have to actually study, right? What do they have to do if they want to get involved?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think, as you said, it's a very exciting area, in particular at the moment, to work in, and it's really a highly interdisciplinary area. As I think this conversation that we had has shown. There's a lot of different aspects and different skills that I guess we as a team have all together while working on this. So my background originally, I studied physics, but I did a lot of also studies in what people call complex systems, so systems that are made of many components. In the case of a social study, this could be lots of people, for instance, moving around. So these complex systems are very, very interesting to study, and that's where the kind of area in which I did my PhD. But of course, there's a lot of there's a need of a lot of computational skills. Of course, working with this data, analyzing this data requires to be able to use a computer and to program the computer to do the analysis for you. And then I guess it's crucial also to have the some knowledge of the methods that you need to analyze this data. So statistics is very important, and we hear a lot in the news over the last few years about machine learning, machines learning about different aspects of, for instance, our behavior, our society from the data that we all produce. So it's really kind of a combination of many different things.
Yeah, Ricardo, so you concurred? I mean, were there any skills that you acquired through the years? And we'll go to Hugo. I don't think I can contribute on that part, to be honest, because I learned COBOL as a programming language, right? So
actually, I started as a physicist, as Federico, but then I moved a little bit through the economics, but just to understand and to have a grasp of the impact of human interaction. Then this depends up to the guy that wants to engage with our framework and our subject. But if you want, you can do some transportation analysis, or you can tackle this from our point of view now that we are a computer science department. So we are more centered on data science, and so we take this data and we try to get information from that, and we can do using statistics tools or machine learning tools. And gather this information can help us to provide new metrics. And then with these new metrics, of course, you need a little bit to focus to other disciplines, because you have to talk with a spatial planner or geographer, or maybe the researcher that do epidemiology, to provide them some features, some metrics. So you need to have a wider knowledge, at least, to talk with this other actor, because it's a very complex environment. But then you can decide the path of computer science that could be good, or like come from physics. But then you have to work a lot about coding, because there are big data in this case, and we are working for that. We're working with that. So it's like, yes, this.
Hugo, anything you want to add?
Yes, I agree with them. It's that like nowadays, these data-driven approaches, they are very intensive in terms of coding, data analysis skills. But there's one important dimension as well. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we are talking about social systems and socioeconomic systems, and it's crucial for us, if we want to have a better understanding of these systems, for us to understand the literature in the social sciences and the humanities, in economy, because there is like more than a century of scientific literature about human mobility in demography and social sciences. So it's important for us to, especially to guide our computational strategy, is to have an understanding of what's happening. What is a society? What are the social pressures? What are the economic pressures? And it's important for us, like coming from the computer science and physics, for us to be humble, to drink from these other sources as well, and to be open-minded, to read the literature and see what people have been doing. And because I think if we want to contribute to a better understanding of these systems, and we can contribute, I think it's important for us to start from what like these other areas have done already.
Right.
So in addition to summarize, in addition to like the computer science, physics, transportation geography, it's important for us to also study social sciences, economy, demography, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So embrace the multidisciplinarity here of the field completely, right? So I'm gonna also say that people interested, now is my shameless advertisement, right? We know that as a group, we are trying to put together, perhaps for next year, some sort of program in Exeter in urban systems and urban analytics. So that might be a way, and maybe in that program we will have all those dimensions: social dimension, engineering, machine learning, physics, so that people can actually get into it. I really appreciate you guys joining. So I'll finish here, but I will go around to see last words from everyone. But again, thank you very much, and thank you for the people who stayed online on YouTube. The brave people who perhaps didn't have a better thing to do on Friday. But anyway, I'm joking. So I'll go around and start with, I guess, Hugo, you can start, and then I'll finish with Fede. So any last words before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I can start that. I want to first thank you, Ronaldo, for inviting us to join in this nice talk. It's an opportunity for us to discuss a little bit of our findings. And I think I want to wrap up this talk is that we're facing a very critical moment in terms of as a society, we don't know yet what are going to be the consequences of that in the long term. But one thing that for me is very clear at this moment is that we have to take care of ourselves in terms to prevent us and to from not only from getting in contact with the virus, but also in terms of our well-being as well, or healthy. And I think as we are in a moment that we are starting to move towards opening back to the mobility, I think this is an opportunity for us to reflect on do you want to go back to the normal that we had before? Like if you look at societies in terms of inequality, in terms of segregation, even mobility segregation, I think it's an opportunity for us to reflect on what is the new normal that we want to have, and maybe to change the way we do things to at least take some steps towards this direction.
Right, thank you. Very, very. I agree completely. Ricardo.
Yeah, I really agree with what just Hugo said. And then, yes, take this opportunity, this future that is open of possibility, it's full of possibility. And eventually decide one thing that you can go ahead. That you don't need to be overwhelmed about all this project and take all this stuff that the world is sending to us. Just try to do something that can change your life in the future. A little one, maybe you want to do more green, you want to do better, you want to do more in more social help, or something in any direction. Decide one little battle that you can fight, and then you can help to improve the world and then improve yourself, because it's always an improvement of ourselves. So we take these 2 or 3 months of self-isolation. Somebody of us start to do some hobbies, somebody start to learn a lot. And maybe there will be not very good time for the economies. Go ahead. We don't know if it's going to recover very fast or it's going to recover a little bit slower. But maybe there is some possibility to come back to study to and learn something new, or eventually to focus and to gather new experience. So try to do not be overwhelmed by the future, but try to a little bit use this as an opportunity. And stay safe, and thank you for your time and to be with us.
I appreciate that, Fede.
Yeah, no, I agree with what both Hugo and Ricardo have said. I think they've said a lot of the things that that I also feel and I was thinking of saying. And I think one aspect that I guess both Hugo and Ricardo mentioned that is a particularly unprecedented situation, and I think there's still a lot going on, and the situation is still difficult, and it will take a while to get better. And I think there's still lots of things that we need to understand. I think one thing that Hugo said I think is very important is that there's a lot of talking about how, because it's kind of the priority, I guess, to how how we can reduce the virus and everything and help the economy as well. But I think one thing which is also going to be incredibly important in the kind of coming months is also how this whole situation has not only affected our economy and our physical health, but also has affected our mental health and well-being, with people having to have suddenly changed their lives drastically, not being able to see family for months, for instance, and not being able to see friends for months. And so I think this is also a very important aspect that will come into play in the next few months.
All right, well said, everyone. So I appreciate Last thing, if anyone has questions about the report, I encourage them to write to Ricardo. His email address is on the report there. We're happy to answer more questions. And who knows, maybe we'll do another conversation. I personally enjoyed. It was really nice.
Really nice.
So it's kind of informal. So maybe when Ricardo allow us to do the report 4 or something, then we have another one, right? All right, guys.
Have a good weekend.
Take
care.
Of the video. So
yes, they're on the video description. Yes, you're right.
Yep.
There are all the links to the report on the YouTube.
All right.
So
all right, guys.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you. Have a good